Under the indifferent gaze of a moon veiled in frost, Kalira Dorn's shadow stretched long and empty across the snow-swept threshold of Ironfall, a silhouette without echo. The wind clawed at her threadbare cloak, carrying the sharp tang of pine and distant hearth smoke from the pack's stronghold. Ironfall sprawled like a jagged crown against the northern mountains, its timber halls ringed by ancient pines that whispered secrets to the gales. Snow fell in relentless veils, blanketing the world in a hush that amplified every heartbeat, every ragged breath. Kalira, at 23, had known this cold all her life, born to it, shaped by it, yet never truly warmed. Her skin, pale as the drifts, prickled under the onslaught, but the deeper chill came from within, a void where her wolf should have stirred. She stood at the edge of the gathering circle, the pack's eyes upon her, like shards of ice. Alpha Thorn, broad-shouldered and silver-streaked, loomed on the raised dais, his voice a low rumble that cut through the murmurs. Kalira Dorn, daughter of no spirit, bearer of silence, the goddess has marked you empty. You offer nothing to the bloodline, no howl, no hunt, no legacy. His words were ritual, etched in the pack's lore, but they landed like blows, each one reopening the wound of her 18th naming ceremony, when the moon had risen full and her inner beast failed to awaken. Wolfless. The term slithered through the crowd, a curse disguised as fact. Her hands trembled at her sides, fingers numb not just from the frost, but from the weight of their stares. Ilara, her once sister in the Omega ranks, averted her gaze, the firelight from the central pyre dancing shadows across her face. The flames crackled hungrily, fed by logs that spat embers into the night, mirroring the heat rising in Kalira's chest, a futile spark against the encroaching dark. She had served them faithfully, mending hides, tending the young, whispering prayers to the lunar shrines. But service from emptiness was no virtue. It was pity, and pity in Ironfall was a blade turned inward. Thorn raised his arm, the alpha mark on his forearm, a crescent scar glowing faintly under the moon's pale light, catching the eye. By the laws of Fang and Frost, you are cast out. Seek no shelter here. Let the wilds claim what the goddess denied. The pack's response was a chorus of low growls, weavos rising in a mournful wave that shook the snow from branches overhead. Kalira's throat tightened, the air thick with the metallic scent of their authority, blood oaths unspoken but felt in her bones. She turned, steps crunching into the fresh powder, the circle's warmth fading at her back. The path wound downward from the village, flanked by sentinel pines whose needles pierced the gloom like forgotten spears. No one followed, no final embrace, no whispered farewell. Her boots, worn thin from endless labors, sank deeper with each stride, the cold seeping through to numb her feet. What was strength, if not enduring the silence of one's own soul? The question haunted her, a philosophy born of lonely nights by the fire's edge, watching others shift under the moon, while she remained bound to flesh alone. By dawn's gray creep, Ironfall was a smudge on the horizon, swallowed by the mist-shrouded valleys. Kalira descended into the human lowlands, where the mountains yielded to rolling hills dotted with thatched roofs and plowed fields. The air here was softer, laced with the earthy rot of turned soil and the faint smoke of bakeries, but it offered no solace. Humans eyed her warily, a lone woman with the wild scent of the packs clinging to her hair, yet they needed hands for toil. She found work first in a miller's stead, grinding grain until her palms blistered, the rhythmic thud of the wheel a poor substitute for the heartbeat of a wolf she never had. Months blurred into a numb rhythm. She slept in haylofts, her dreams fractured by visions of golden light piercing the frost, a warmth that teased but never lingered. The villagers called her the Silent One, their superstitions weaving tales of her as a changeling or worse. Kalira bore it quietly, her Omega instincts, faint echoes of nurturing, of yielding, guiding her to mend fences, soothe fevered children, all while the void gnawed deeper. Descendants? A cruel jest. Who would claim her, barren of spirit? The moon watched indifferently from her new skies, its phases mocking the cycle she could never join. One eve, as autumn's bite sharpened the winds, she trudged the rutted road between hamlets, a sack of meager wages slung over her shoulder. The sun bled red across the horizon, staining the snow-tipped grasses, when a guttural groan shattered the quiet. There, slumped against a boulder, lay a warrior, massive, clad in furs rent by claw and blade, blood crusting his side like darkened rubies. His eyes, storm-gray and fever-bright, met hers as she froze. No pack scent clung to him, only the raw iron of injury and something deeper, a shadowed royalty that pulled at her like tide to shore. Instinct overrode fear. She knelt, pressing cloth to his wound, the warmth of his blood seeping through her fingers, hot against the encroaching chill. He murmured words lost to pain, his hand, calloused, bearing a faint golden gleam under the grime, brushing hers. In that touch, a spark ignited, unbidden and inexplicable, as if the moon itself had leaned closer. But she pushed it down, rationalizing it as delirium's gift. Strangers passed in the night. Aid was fleeting, nothing more. As she bound his gashes by the roadside fire's glow, the flames leaping like wary spirits, Kalira felt the first stirrings of an unfamiliar ache, not rejection's echo, but a quiet unraveling. The warrior's breath steadied under her care, his gaze lingering on her face with a curiosity that mirrored her own buried longing. Yet dawn would come, and with it, the road's demand. She rose, leaving him to the fates, unaware that in the weave of blood and frost, her emptiness had begun to fracture. The first light of dawn bled through the canopy of skeletal oaks, painting the warrior's face in hues of bruised gold and shadow. Kalira lingered at the edge of the makeshift camp, her hands still stained with the residue of his blood, a sticky warmth that clung like an accusation. The fire had dwindled to embers, its faint crackle yielding to the chorus of awakening birds, sharp and indifferent. She should have been gone by now, the road calling her to the next village where laundry lines sagged under the weight of human lives and their endless mundane needs. But something held her, a thread of curiosity woven with the fear that coiled in her gut, tight as a snare. He stirred, a low groan escaping his lips, and those storm-gray eyes fluttered open, locking onto hers with an intensity that made the air thicken. Rovan Keth, though she knew him not by name, carried the weight of unseen battles in the lines etched around his mouth, the faint scar tracing his jaw like a river of frozen lightning. His furs, torn and matted, revealed the breadth of his chest, rising and falling with labored breaths. No pack insignia marked him, only the subtle gleam of a torque around his neck, a band of ancient gold, etched with runes that caught the light like captured sunlight. It pulsed faintly, or perhaps that was her imagination, born of exhaustion and the night's strangeness. You stayed, he rasped, his voice a gravelly timbre that echoed the rumble of distant thunder. He pushed himself up against the boulder, wincing as the bandages she had hastily tied shifted. Blood had seeped through in dark blooms, but the flow had slowed, thanks to her steady hands. Kalira stepped back instinctively, her boots sinking into the dew-kissed grass, the chill seeping up her legs like a warning. "I mended what I could," she replied, her tone flat, guarded. Omega habits died hard, nurture the wounded, yield to the strong, but this man was no stray pup. His scent enveloped her now, a heady mix of iron-rich blood, pine sap from the wilds, and something primal, like the earth after a storm. It tugged at her core, an instinctive pull she had no wolf to answer with, only the hollow echo of her own humanity. Fear bloomed there, sharp as the wind's bite. What if he was hunted, a fugitive from some greater pack? What if his gaze saw through her emptiness, naming it aloud? Rovan's eyes narrowed, assessing her with a predator's patience. Not many would risk the road at dusk for a dying stranger. Why? He extended a hand, not in threat, but invitation, the golden torque shifting against his collarbone. Up close, it was no mere trinket. The metal seemed alive, humming with a warmth that defied the morning frost. She hesitated, then knelt to check the binding, her fingers brushing his skin. The contact sent a jolt through her, electric and unwelcome, like the first crack in winter ice. Pity, perhaps, or foolishness. The villages are kinder to those who help than those who pass by. Lies, half-formed to shield herself. Truth was, in his fevered murmurs the night before, he had spoken of shadows pursuing him, betrayals in high halls, a crown heavy with guilt. His pain had mirrored her own exile, a shared fracture in the soul's armor. He chuckled, a sound both bitter and weary, like wind through hollow reeds. Pity from one who walks alone? I smell the wild on you, yet no pack's loyalty. What hunts you then? His question pierced, drawing her gaze to his. In those depths, she saw not judgment, but a kindred melancholy, the weight of duty unfulfilled, choices that scarred deeper than claws. Kalira pulled away, rising to stamp out the embers, the ash gritty under her boot. Nothing hunts me. I'm unbound. The word tasted like defeat, the void within her yawning wider under his scrutiny. Curiosity warred with denial. She wanted to flee this man who stirred echoes of what she could never claim, yet his presence anchored her, a gravitational pull born of isolation's ache. The golden torque caught her eye again, its runes whispering of forgotten lore, of alphas born under auspicious moons. What if he saw her as she was, wolfless, worthless? The fear twisted, mingling with an inexplicable draw, as if the goddess herself toyed with invisible strings. Rovan struggled to his feet, towering over her now, his frame casting a long shadow that swallowed the dawn's tentative warmth. Unbound is not the same as free. I know that road. He swayed slightly, but his hand steadied on her shoulder, firm yet gentle, the heat of his palm seeping through her cloak. In that touch, the world narrowed. The rustle of leaves, the distant uivo of some far-off wolf, the metallic tang of blood on the breeze, all faded to the rhythm of their breaths, sinking, unbidden. She shrugged off his grip, heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. Dawn comes, I must go. But her steps faltered, curiosity blooming into something perilously close to connection. He was no ordinary wanderer. The air around him hummed with restrained power, a king's aura veiled in wounds. Denied, she told herself, mere survival's illusion, nothing more. Yet as she turned toward the road, the golden gleam of his torque followed her, a symbol etched into her mind's frost, promising revelations she dared not seek. The path ahead wound through mist-shrouded meadows, but behind her, Rovan's voice carried on the wind. Wait, the shadows I spoke of, they draw near. Ride with me, if only till the next rise. Fear and intrigue tangled in her chest, the instinctive bond pulling taut. What harm in a shared horizon, if only to unravel the mystery of his gaze? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The mist clung to the meadows like a shroud, veiling the world in silken gray, as Kalira hesitated on the rutted path. Rovan's words hung in the air, a tether she both resented and craved, pulling her back from the solitude that had become her armor. The golden torque at his throat caught a stray beam of sunlight, its runes flickering like embers in dying ash, a silent promise of perils, unspoken. She turned, meeting his gaze, storm-gray eyes now sharpened by resolve, the fever's haze burned away by dawn's clarity. What shadows hunted him? The question stirred the void within her, a faint ripple where her wolf should have howled warning. "Fine," she murmured, the word tasting of surrender, not to him, but to the unraveling thread of her isolation. "Till the next rise, no more." He nodded, a faint curve touching his lips, weary yet grateful, and together they set off, his stride favoring the uninjured side while she matched it, sack of wages bouncing against her hip. The road twisted upward into the foothills, where the air grew thinner, laced with the crisp bite of pine and the distant rumble of hidden streams. No words passed between them at first, only the crunch of boots on frost-kissed earth, the occasional gust whipping her cloak like an impatient spectre. As the sun climbed, painting the hills in muted golds, Rovan spoke of fragments, betrayals in the high courts of the Highland packs, where ambition clawed at thrones like wolves at a kill. He was no mere warrior, she gleaned. His voice carried the timbre of command, tempered by a guilt that shadowed his confessions. "I led them into the fray for honor's sake," he said, pausing to lean against a weathered oak, his breath visible in the chill. "But honor bleeds the innocent. Now the rivals circle, scenting weakness in my flight." His hand absently traced the torque, its warmth seeming to pulse against his skin, a relic from a lineage steeped in lunar oaths. Kalira listened, her steps slowing as empathy crept in, unbidden. His wounds mirrored her own, not the gashes she had bound, but the deeper scars of duty's betrayal, the isolation of one deemed unfit. She had no pack to mourn, no crown to lose, yet the ache resonated, a shared frost in their veins. "And you think shadows follow?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder at the empty trail. The wind carried a faint, unnatural hush, as if the forest held its breath. He straightened, nostrils flaring. "They do. Riders from the rival clans, scouts with blades thirsty for my blood. If they find me alone—" The sentence trailed, but his eyes darkened, the melancholy deepening into resolve. Before she could retreat into denial, a distant howl pierced the air, not the wild cry of beasts, but a warped signal, laced with intent. Pursuit. Kalira's pulse quickened, the instinctive omega urge to flee warring with the pull to stand firm beside this broken king. Why him? Why now? The golden gleam of his torque seemed to answer, a beacon in her periphery, symbol of a power she could never claim yet inexplicably shared. They veered from the path, plunging into a ravine where jagged rocks sheltered a narrow ledge overlooking a frozen creek. The air grew colder here, the water's surface a mirror of cracked ice reflecting the overhanging pines like skeletal guardians. Rovan guided her to a crevice half hidden by boulders, its mouth veiled in icicles that dripped like slow tears. "Here," he whispered, pressing her back against the damp stone, his body shielding hers as the howls drew nearer, 3, perhaps 4 voices echoing off the cliffs in a symphony of menace. Time fractured in the dim confines, their breaths mingling in the tight space, warm against the encroaching chill. Kalira's heart hammered, the scent of his blood, faint now, mingled with sweat and earth, enveloping her like a cloak. Fear coiled in her gut, but beneath it bloomed something fiercer. Curiosity transmuting to trust, the void within her echoing his guarded vulnerability. He had not demanded her aid, he had asked, as if her choice mattered. What was strength, if not choosing alliance in the face of the storm? The riders crested the ridge above, their silhouettes dark against the midday pallor, cloaked figures on shaggy mounts, eyes glinting like polished obsidian. One dismounted, sniffing the air, his growl a guttural command that sent pebbles skittering down the slope. Rovan's hand found hers in the shadows, calloused fingers intertwining with a gentleness that belied his warrior's frame. The contact ignited no spark this time, but a steady warmth seeping into her bones like fire through frost. She did not pull away. Instead, she squeezed back, the bond forging in silence, empathy weaving their fractures into fragile unity. A scout's boot crunched perilously close, the metallic tang of their blades cutting the air as they scanned the ravine. Kalira held her breath, the creek's murmur below a fragile veil. Rovin's free hand hovered near his hidden dagger, but he did not strike. Patience, not rashness, his creed. Minutes stretched into eternity, the cold seeping through her cloak, numbing her limbs while his proximity anchored her. The intruders lingered, cursing the wind, then retreated, their howls fading into the distance like defeated echoes. When silence reclaimed the ravine, Rovin released her hand, but the imprint lingered, a phantom heat against her palm. They emerged into the pale light, the torque's gold now dulled by shadow, yet its presence thrummed between them, a symbol of trials endured. "You could have run," he said softly, his gaze searching hers, the melancholy lifting like mist under sun. "Why stay?" Kalira met his eyes, the pull no longer denied but acknowledged, a quiet acceptance blooming in her chest. "Because the wilds take thee alone, and perhaps we are less alone together." The words escaped unbidden, raw as blood on snow, the bond solidifying. Not love, not yet, but a refuge forged in shared peril, where guilt and emptiness found tentative harbor. As they pressed on toward the next rise, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faint scent of smoke from hidden hearths. The golden torque swayed with his steps, a recurring gleam that promised deeper revelations, while the moon's distant watch overhead hinted at destinies entwined. In this fragile alliance, Kalira felt the first thaw of her isolation, a warmth born not of pity, but of chosen mercy. Yet the shadows lingered, unseen, and with them the dilemmas yet to unfold. The sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks, casting the ravine's shadows into elongated claws that clawed at the snow-dusted earth. Kalira's boots crunched over brittle ice as she and Rovin emerged from their hidden crevice, the air thick with the aftermath of pursuit, a lingering metallic tang of fear sweat and the faint, acrid bite of the scout's torch smoke drifting on the wind. Her hand still bore the ghost of his grip, a warmth that lingered like embers under frost, thawing the edges of her guarded heart. They had survived together, not by fang or fury, but by the quiet choice of shared breath in the dark. Yet as they crested the next rise, the foothills giving way to a vast, wind-swept plateau ringed by ancient standing stones, unease coiled in her belly, sharper than the chill gnawing at her bones. Rovin moved with renewed purpose, his wounds bandaged but unhealed, the golden torque at his throat catching the fading light like a captive star. It had become her anchor, that gleaming band, its runes whispering of bloodlines unbroken, of alphas forged in lunar fire. He led her toward a cluster of weathered ruins at the plateau's heart, remnants of some forgotten temple where the stones stood sentinel, etched with crescents and spirals that mirrored the moon's phases. "This place," he murmured, his voice low against the rising gale, "holds the old ways. The goddess listens here, if she listens at all." His storm-gray eyes scanned the horizon, melancholy etching deeper lines into his face, the weight of his exile pressing like an unseen crown. Kalira followed, her cloak whipping around her like a tattered wing, the wind carrying distant weavos that echoed her inner turmoil. The bond between them had shifted in the ravine's confines, not the instinctive howl of mates, but a fragile empathy, born of mirrored fractures. She had chosen to stay, to weave her emptiness into his guilt, yet doubt festered. What place had a wolfless omega in a king's shadowed flight? The plateau opened before them, a frozen expanse where snow swirled in eddies, blanketing the ruins in pristine white. They sought shelter in the lee of a toppled monolith, its surface cool and smooth under her palm as she leaned against it, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Night fell swiftly, the moon rising full and unyielding, its silver light bathing the stones in an ethereal glow. Rovan kindled a small fire with flint and tinder from his pouch, the flames leaping hungrily to life, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. The warmth was a balm, chasing the day's chill from her skin, but as she sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest, a deeper heat stirred within, a subtle flutter, alien and insistent, low in her abdomen. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to the road's rigors, the scant meals of foraged roots and dried meat. Yet it persisted, a rhythmic pulse syncing with the fire's crackle, as if the flames themselves whispered to her blood. Rovan watched her, his gaze piercing the veil of flames, the torque pulsing faintly in rhythm with the night. "You carry a shadow in your eyes," he said, breaking the silence, his tone laced with that ethical restraint she had come to recognize, the king's duty to probe without demanding. "Since the ravine, you've grown distant. Speak it, if you will." He extended a skewer of roasted hair, the meat's savory scent mingling with the pine smoke. But she waved it away, her hand pressing unconsciously to her belly. The flutter intensified, a warm tide rising unbidden, and with it came a vision, fragmented, vivid, like shards of moonlight piercing storm clouds. She saw golden light spilling from her womb, a child with eyes like forged sun, its cry commanding the winds to still. Wolves bowed in the snow, packs from distant lands kneeling before an aura that shattered hierarchies, revealing her, the empty one, as the vessel of destiny. The torque's runes burned in her mind's eye, intertwining with the vision, as if the relic itself recognized the truth. Gasping, Kalira's eyes flew open, meeting Rovan's widened stare. The fire roared suddenly brighter, embers spiraling upward in defiance of the wind. And the standing stones hummed, a low vibration that resonated in her bones. "What sorcery is this?" Rovan whispered, rising to his knees, his hand reaching across the flames. But he froze as the torque ignited, a soft golden radiance emanating from its metal, bathing them both in warmth that defied the lunar chill. It was no illusion. The air shimmered, carrying the faint scent of blooming night flowers amid the frost, a spiritual bloom long absent from these barren heights. Kalira's breath hitched, the vision's weight crashing upon her. She was with child, conceived in that roadside touch, a miracle defying the pack's laws of spirit and blood, wolfless, yet bearer of power unbound. You are the key," Rovan breathed, awe fracturing his melancholy, his voice trembling with revelation. He crawled closer, the fire's heat paling against the torque's glow, his fingers hovering near her belly as if afraid to profane the sacred. The old prophecies spoke of a silent vessel, one denied the howl, who would birth the golden alpha, the one to unite the fractured lands, to redeem the guilty thrones. Guilt shadowed his features anew, not for his past betrayals, but for the destiny he had unwittingly ignited. That night on the road, our paths crossed under the moon's blind eye. I am Rovan Keth, Alpha Supreme of the Highlands, fled from rivals who covet my crown. And you, Kalira, your emptiness was the goddess's veil, hiding the light that will shatter empires. Tears traced cold paths down her cheeks, the wind howling in sympathy, whipping snow into veils that blurred the stars. The void within her no longer yawned empty. It thrummed with purpose, a hidden gift manifesting as life's defiant spark. Yet fear laced the wonder. What chains would this child forge? The packs that cast her out would kneel or strike, her rejection transmuted into a beacon that demanded reckoning. Rovan's hand finally settled over hers on her belly, the torque's warmth sealing their bond, empathy blooming into profound acceptance. In his eyes, she saw not pity, but reverence, the king's guilt yielding to redemption's promise. The moon watched impassively, its light silvering the snow, as the first distant howls answered the temple's hum, word spreading on ethereal winds, drawing the world's gaze to this frozen cradle. Kalira leaned into the vision's truth, the fire's glow mirroring the golden life within, a rebirth forged in blood and frost. But dilemmas loomed. To claim this destiny meant confronting the past, choosing compassion over the war her child might unleash. Strength, she realized, was not in howling defiance, but in embracing the light born of silence. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment, Luna, if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your. The wind howled through the standing stones like a lament from the goddess's throat, carrying the scent of pine resin and impending storm as Kalira clutched the rough edge of the monolith. The fire's embers had cooled to a sullen glow, but the warmth in her belly persisted, a defiant pulse against the night's encroaching frost. Rovan knelt beside her, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the moon's silver sheen, the golden torque at his throat now dimmed yet resonant, as if it mourned the peace they had briefly claimed. Revelation had bound them, but the plateau's isolation shattered under the thunder of approaching hooves, distant at first, then a relentless drumbeat that shook snow from the ancient pillars. "They come," Rovan growled, rising with the fluid grace of a predator roused, his hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at his belt. The torque caught the moonlight, its runes flickering like veins of captured lightning, a symbol that now weighed heavier on them both. Kalira's breath caught, the vision's golden light within her twisting into knots of dread. 9 months had blurred since that roadside touch, her body swelling in secret through the lowland's toils, the child's aura hidden until this lunar vigil unveiled it. But the past did not yield to miracles. It clawed back, demanding judgment. The riders burst from the mist-shrouded tree line, a phalanx of shadowed figures on frost-maned steeds, their cloaks billowing like raven wings. At their fore rode Alpha Thorn of Ironfall, his silver-streaked mane whipping in the gale, the crescent scar on his forearm gleaming under torchlight. Flanking him were the pack's enforcers, Alara among them, her face a mask of conflicted fury, and behind, a rival alpha from the eastern clans, Draven Blackthorn, whose torque was iron dark, etched with thorns that spoke of conquest over mercy. Betrayal hung in the air like blood scent. Whispers of Rovan's flight had reached the highlands, drawing opportunists like wolves to a fresh kill. Draven's eyes, cold as glacial depths, fixed on the golden relic at Rovan's throat, hungering for the supremacy it symbolized. Thorn dismounted first, his boots crunching into the snow with authoritative finality, the pack fanning out to encircle the ruins. "Rovan Keth, pretender to thrones stained with Highland blood," he bellowed, voice cutting through the wind like a blade. "Your flight ends here, on sacred ground, and you—" His gaze shifted to Kalira, narrowing in disbelief as recognition dawned. "The empty one, cast out for your silence, now bloated with—" "What delusion?" The pack's growls rippled, low and accusatory, Alara's eyes widening as the child's aura brushed them. A subtle golden hum that forced several betas to their knees, instincts overriding scorn. Kalira rose unsteadily, one hand cradling her swollen form, the other pressing against the cold stone for anchor. The void that had defined her now thrummed with the babe's power, a hidden Pathfinder's gift, manifesting in waves of warmth that pierced the chill. Rejection's echo surged back, raw as the night of her exile. Thorn's ritual words, the circle's indifferent stares, the path downward into nothingness. Yet here, under the moon's unblinking eye, she stood not as victim, but vessel, the torque's golden light mirroring the life she bore. "Delusion?" she echoed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, the wind tearing at her cloak like vengeful fingers. "You cast me into the wilds for lacking a howl, Alpha Thorn, but the goddess wove silence to cradle what your laws could not foresee." Draven laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the stones, his enforcers drawing blades that glinted red in the torchlight. "Prophecies are for fools and fallen kings. That child in your belly reeks of anomaly, wolfless spawn from a traitor's seed. "Hand it over, Omega, and perhaps we'll grant you mercy's shadow." His words were poison, laced with the rival's ambition. He had orchestrated Roven's betrayal, whispering doubts into allied pacts, turning guilt into exile. Roven stepped forward, positioning himself between Kalira and the encroaching circle, his frame taut with restrained fury, the torque pulsing brighter as if feeding on his resolve. "You speak of mercy, Draven, yet your hands drip with the blood of kin," Roven countered, his tone measured, ethical melancholy threading through the growl. The fire's remnants sparked anew at his feet, embers flaring like accusations. He had led charges for unity, only to see them fracture under treachery. Now, confronting the architect of his fall, guilt warred with the king's duty to protect what destiny had forged. Kalira felt it in his stance, the pull toward war, claws and blood to reclaim his throne, versus the deeper redemption blooming in her presence. The child's aura swelled, forcing Thorn's own betas to falter, their howls turning to whimpers of instinctive submission. Alara broke ranks, stepping closer, her eyes locked on Kalira's belly, torn between loyalty and awe. "Sister, is it true? The golden alpha, born of emptiness?" Her voice cracked, the wind carrying the scent of her uncertainty, pine and tears. Kalira met her gaze, the bond of shared Omega trials flickering amid the pain. Forgiveness tempted, a choice to heal the fractures of Ironfall rather than widen them into war. But freedom whispered too, to walk unbound, claiming the child's light without the pack's chains. Love, in Roven's shadowed profile, offered neither fully. Redemption demanded they stand together, yet at what cost? Thorn snarled, lunging forward, but the golden hum intensified, a spiritual wave that rippled outward, snow swirling in luminous eddies. Draven's horse reared, the rival alpha cursing as his iron torque blackened in the aura's glow, cymbals clashing like thunder. Roven's hand found Kalira's, intertwining with a firmness born of choice, not command, the torque's warmth sealing their unity against the storm. "Enough," Roven declared, voice rising like a weevo under the moon. "This child is no prize for your games. It redeems what we've broken, or it will, if we choose compassion over conquest." The circle tightened, blades drawn, the air thick with the metallic tang of impending blood. Kalira's heart pounded, the babe kicking fiercely, as if urging her toward the moral precipice. Forgive the rejectors, bind the packs in mercy's fragile crown, or unleash the golden fury, claiming freedom through war's fire. Thorn hesitated, the crescent scar on his arm pulsing in sync with the aura, doubt cracking his authority. Draven, unyielding, spurred his mount forward, but Alara shifted, her stance wavering toward alliance. In that suspended breath, the moon veiled itself in clouds, plunging the plateau into twilight's grasp. Kalira squeezed Roven's hand, the torque's gleam her lodestar, as the first clash of steel rang out, a beta's blade glancing off stone. Strength, she thought, was not in the howl of victory, but in the choice that tempered blood with light. The confrontation crested, dilemmas fracturing like ice under pressure, the night's judgment hanging on her unspoken vow, love as redemption or liberty's solitary flame. The wind screamed, carrying the promise of sacrifice as shadows and gold collided in the frost-kissed ruins. The clash erupted like thunder trapped in the stones, steel singing against steel as Draven's enforcers surged forward, their blades carving arcs through the swirling snow. Kalira pressed against the monolith's unyielding flank, the rough etchings biting into her palm like the claws of forgotten ancestors, grounding her amid the chaos. The golden torque at Roven's throat blazed brighter, a defiant sun against the moon's veiled pallor, its runes pulsing in rhythm with the child's insistent kicks, each one a reminder of the life that bound her to this precipice. Wind howled through the ruins, whipping flakes into stinging veils that blurred the fray, carrying the coppery reek of drawn blood and the guttural snarls of beasts unchained. Rovan met the first assault head-on, his dagger flashing in a blur of restrained fury, parrying a rival's strike that glanced off his shoulder, tearing fresh crimson into his furs. He moved not with the wild abandon of vengeance, but the measured grace of a king haunted by too many graves, each block a choice to protect rather than destroy. "Stand down, Draven!" he roared over the din, voice cracking like ice under strain, the torque's glow casting elongated shadows that danced like spectral wolves. Guilt etched his features, the melancholy of his highland betrayals resurfacing in the heat of battle. He had fled to spare his pack's further slaughter, yet here destiny dragged him back, demanding he forge redemption from the ruins of his crown. Thorn's pack encircled them, a ring of frost-silvered eyes and bared fangs, their loyalty fracturing under the golden aura emanating from Kalira's belly. The child stirred the air with invisible waves, compelling betas to falter mid-lunge, their knees buckling as if the earth itself commanded obeisance. Elara hovered at the edge, her lithe form taut, claws half-extended, torn between the Alpha's decree and the pull of old sisterhood. "Kalira," she called, voice slicing through the melee like a hesitant blade, her breath fogging in the gale. "This power, it calls to us. But Thorn swears it's abomination, spawn of the Wolfless, unfit for the bloodlines." Kalira's heart thundered, a visceral drum echoing the distant weavos that now answered from the shadowed tree line, packs converging like moths to the Torque's flame. The void she had carried for years no longer mocked her. It had been the goddess's shroud, concealing this pathfinder's gift, a child whose light exposed the fragility of hierarchies built on fang and exclusion. Yet the revelation twisted into torment. Forgiveness for Ironfall's scorn, or the liberty of unleashing the golden fury to shatter their chains? Love for Rovan pulled her toward the former, his ethical restraint a mirror to her own buried compassion. But freedom whispered of a life unbound, where rejection's scars need not heal into duty's yoke. What was power, if not the mercy to withhold the storm? Draven broke through the line, his iron torque clashing against Rovan's gold in a shower of sparks that illuminated the snow like falling stars. The rival Alpha's face contorted in rage, thorns on his band blackening under the aura's touch, symbolizing the conquest that withered before true destiny. "Your guilt blinds you, Keth," he spat, driving Rovan back toward the monolith, their boots carving furrows in the drifts. "This Omega's whelp threatens all. Packs will war over it or kneel to a pretender's dream. Yield the child and claim your exile alive." His blade nicked Rovan's arm, blood welling dark and hot, the scent mingling with the pine-choked wind, a visceral reminder of the wars his choices had birthed. Rovan staggered but held, the torque flaring to repel the strike. Its warmth seeping into Kalira's skin as she edged closer, the child's power surging in response. A golden hum that rippled outward, forcing Draven's mount to rear and scatter two enforcers into the snow. Thorn watched from afar, his crescent scar throbbing, authority cracking as his own growl faltered. The Alpha who had cast her out now faced the echo of his judgment. Her emptiness had birthed what his rituals could not, a redeemer whose presence humbled the mighty. Elara darted forward, intercepting a beta's lunge at Kalira, her claws raking fur rather than flesh. "Enough," she snarled, eyes locking with Kalira's across the fray. "The moon reveals what we denied. Sister, choose, bind us in your light, or let the old ways consume us all." The plea pierced deeper than any blade, stirring the philosophy Kalira had forged in lonely exiles. Strength lay not in the howl of dominance, but in the quiet choice of compassion amid the blood. Rovan glanced back, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers through the swirl of combat, a silent question in their depths: love as redemption's path, or the solitary flame of freedom. The torque gleamed between them, a recurring beacon of the bloodline they had unwittingly woven, its gold now streaked with Rovin's fresh wounds, symbolizing the sacrifice woven into every union. Kalira stepped into the fray's edge, hand splayed over her belly, channeling the aura's warmth into a deliberate wave. It washed over the circle, not as weapon but plea, snow melting in golden rivulets, the air filling with the faint, ethereal scent of thawing earth. Draven recoiled, his iron band cracking audibly, while Thorn dropped to one knee, the pack's growls dissolving into whimpers of awe. "The Golden Alpha," Thorn murmured, voice hoarse with dawning reverence, the wind carrying his submission like a prayer. Ilara knelt beside him, tears freezing on her cheeks, the betrayal of rejection transmuting into fealty. But Draven rallied his remnants, blade raised for a final thrust, ambition unquenched. Rovin intercepted, disarming him with a twist that sent the iron torque skittering into the snow where it dulled to lifeless gray. Kalira's choice crystallized in that breath, forgiveness over war, binding the fractured packs in the child's light rather than liberty's isolating blaze. "No more blood," she declared, voice rising clear and unyielding, the aura cresting like dawn over frost. The golden hum enveloped Draven, forcing his surrender, not through force, but the inexorable pull of destiny's mercy. Rovin sheathed his dagger, pulling her close, his bloodied hand covering hers on her belly, the torquous pulse sinking with their shared resolve. The moon emerged from its veil, silvering the scene in benediction as the packs knelt in the melting snow, rejectors and rivals alike humbled by the rebirth born of what they had despised. Yet the night's judgment lingered, a spiritual weight pressing on Kalira's soul. This union demanded ongoing sacrifice, the child's light a crown of thorns for the redeemed. The wind softened to a whisper, carrying the first cries of distant unity, but dilemmas echoed in the silence. Had mercy crowned them, or merely delayed the storm? Rovin's embrace anchored her, love accepted not as reward, but as the forge of their shared renaissance. The torques gleam, promising trials yet to temper gold from frost. The snow yielded beneath the kneeling packs like a confession long withheld, melting into rivulets of gold-tinged water that traced the ancient stones, as if the earth itself wept in release. Kalira stood at the heart of the ruins, Rovin's arm a steady brace around her waist, his bloodied hand still warm over the swell of her belly where the child's aura thrummed, a living flame against the night's lingering chill. The wind had stilled to a reverent hush, carrying the faint metallic echo of sheathed blades and the ragged breaths of the humbled. Thorn's silver-streaked head bowed low, his crescent scar dulled in the moonlight. While Ilara's tears carved paths through the frost on her cheeks, her once averted gaze now fixed in awe. Even Draven, stripped of his iron torque, knelt in sullen defeat, the rival's ambition fractured like the blackened band buried in the drifts. The golden torque at Rovin's throat pulsed softly, its runes a constellation of warmth that seeped into Kalira's skin, intertwining with the insistent rhythm within her. 9 months of hidden swells and secret journeys had led here, to this frozen altar where rejection's thorns bloomed into destiny's crown. The void she had borne as shame now cradled light unyielding, a pathfinder's gift that exposed the pack's hierarchies as fragile illusions. Yet as the aura's hum crested, a sharp contraction seized her, doubling her over with a gasp that shattered the silence. Pain bloomed visceral and deep, a fire uncoiling through her core, the child's demand for birth as inexorable as the moon's pull. Rovin's eyes widened, storm-gray depths flooding with a mix of terror and fierce protectiveness, his free hand cupping her face. "Now?" he whispered, voice raw with the king's guilt transmuted into vow, the melancholy of his betrayals yielding to this moment of union. He had chosen her not as conquest, but as redemption's anchor, their bond forged in the roadside spark, resisted through exile shared, and accepted in the ravine's shadows. Kalira nodded through gritted teeth, the wind whispering encouragement through the pines, as Alara rose swiftly, her omega instincts overriding old loyalties. "To the inner sanctum," she urged, guiding them toward the ruin's heart, a sunken chamber veiled by fallen slabs, its walls etched with lunar spirals that glowed faintly under the child's influence. They moved as one, the packs parting like waves before a tide, Thorn's enforcers forming a vigilant ring against the encroaching dark. The chamber's air was thick with the scent of ancient moss and thawing stone, a primal hearth long cold, now stirring with ethereal warmth from the aura's glow. Kalira sank onto a bed of furs hastily arranged by Alara's hands, the contraction's vice tightening, sweat beating cold on her brow despite the inner blaze. Rovan knelt beside her, his calloused fingers lacing through hers, the torque's gold reflecting in her vision like a talisman of their entwined fates. "Breathe with me," he murmured, his breath sinking to hers, a rhythm born of refuge's quiet nights, the fire's crackle, the shared silences where empathy had woven their fractures. Pain crested in waves, each one a trial of flesh and spirit, the moon's silver light filtering through cracks overhead like the goddess's watchful gaze. Kalira's cries echoed off the walls, raw and unfiltered, the wolfless Omega's voice a howl in its own right, defying the silence that had defined her. What was rebirth, if not this agony of unveiling? The packs outside knelt deeper, their weavos rising in harmonious chorus, compelled by the golden hum that swelled with every push. Draven's remnants shifted uneasily, their ambition quelled not by blade, but by the inexorable truth, power born not of bloodlines decreed, but of mercy chosen. As the final contraction tore through her, Kalira arched, Rovan's grip her lifeline, his whispers a litany of ethical resolve. "You are the light we denied, the strength we scorned." The child emerged in a rush of warmth and blood, slick and crying, its tiny form radiating a golden sheen that illuminated the chamber like dawn-breaking frost. Ilara wrapped the babe in soft hides, her hands trembling as she placed it in Kalira's arms. The infant's eyes opened, forged sun, deep and knowing, and in that instant, the torque at Rovan's throat blazed, runes aligning with the child's aura in a symphony of light. Wolves beyond the ruins howled in submission, adults from distant clans drawn inexorably, kneeling in the snow as the first golden alpha claimed its breath. Thorn entered then, his broad frame humbled, eyes widening at the sight. The prophecy, fulfilled in the empty one. No scorn laced his words, only the weight of moral reckoning, the rejection that had cast her out now, the forge of a new era. Kalira cradled the child, its warmth seeping into her chest, healing the void's echo with a flood of maternal fire. Rovan leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers, their tears mingling salt and blood on the furs. Union sealed them, not as reward, but as sacrifice's balm. His crown reborn through her light, her exile transmuted into centrality. Freedom's solitary path had tempted, but love's redemption demanded they bind the packs in compassion's fragile weave, forgoing war's blaze for the steady flame of forgiveness. Outside, the moon crested fully, silvering the kneeling masses, rejectors and rivals united under the golden aura. Hierarchies shattered like ice under spring's thaw. The wind carried the scent of blooming night flowers amid the pine, a spiritual renewal whispering of trials to come, alliances to temper, old guilts to mend. Kalira gazed at her son, the torque's gleam dancing in his tiny fist as he grasped it, symbol of bloodlines redefined. Strength was this, choosing mercy's crown over vengeance's thorns, birthing light from darkness's womb. In Rovan's embrace, she felt the Rinascimento complete, Their shared breath a vow against despair, destiny not chain, but revelation's gift. The packs rose slowly, oaths forming on the wind like prayers to the lunar shrines, Ironfall's halls opening anew to the wolfless mother who had birthed their redeemer. Draven, subdued, pledged fealty, his conquest yielding to the child's inexorable pull. Ilara stood sentinel, sisterhood reborn in the glow. As dawn's first blush painted the peaks, Kalira held her golden sun, the torque a bridge between past fractures and future unity, love's proof etched in every heartbeat. The wilds, once her exile, now bowed to her silence's profound roar, a new era dawning, where rejection's ashes fed the flame of eternal redemption. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.